The mental conscious human soul of six plane consciousness experiences the mental world through complete consciousness of feelings and thus has no thoughts at all, but actually feels that he is conscious of the feeling of seeing God face to face consciously in everything and
Continuously.
everywhere.
Continuously.
Yes. Okay. So may I read that from the
Yes,
beginning?
please. Yes,
The
please.
mental conscious human soul of sixth plane consciousness experiences the mental world through complete consciousness of feelings and thus has no thoughts at all, but actually feels that he is conscious of the feeling of seeing God face to face continuously in everything and everywhere. He sees God continuously but cannot see himself in God as God. Therefore, he cannot reconcile his feeling of sight of God with his own identity with God. And thus, he longs for, feels for, has pangs for union with God, whom he sees face to face. This identification with the second state of mind, feeling, is the predominant aspect of divine love, which ultimately leads to union with God.
Let me scroll down for you for that asterisk.
Oh, sure. So the asterisk, this is not to be confused with our ordinary way of seeing an object with our ordinary eyes. To see God face to face is to apprehend God through the one and only sense of the mental plane. And this sense is of seeing. Here the pilgrim has the intuitive recognition of God. This was referring to the point he sees God. Okay. The fifth plane of the mental world is the state of full consciousness of thought. Hence, only mastery over the control and creation of thoughts is established, whereas no mastery nor control over feelings or emotions and desires is established. The sixth plane of the mental world is the state of full consciousness of feeling, and thus mastery over the control and creation of feelings is established, and no more scope is left for even a single thought to penetrate into the domain of feelings. The sixth plane consciousness is thoughtless and governs the feelings of the gross and subtle conscious souls. This is often misinterpreted as mastery over the hearts of all gross and subtle conscious souls. Open parenthesis, a soul with six plane consciousness does not govern or regulate the so-called heart, but controls and governs that state of mind in the mental plane which emanates feelings of emotions and desires, close parenthesis. The loving of God and the longing for his union is really and fully demonstrated in the sixth plane. When even the sixth plane of the mental world is transcended, illusion vanishes and God is realized. In the human form, when the soul is mental conscious, there is this
Dagger.
Huh?
Called a dagger.
Oh yeah, there's this dagger. So the dagger says, see also Meher Baba, mental consciousness in the everything and the nothing book. Pages 101 to 104. And this is the note from editor. Okay. It is in the human form when the soul is mental conscious, it is unconscious of the gross body and the subtle body, but it does work through the gross and subtle bodies, not directly, but on the mental plane. So even if the mental conscious human soul is unconscious of the gross world and the subtle body, and therefore does not realize the gross and subtle worlds, he can unconsciously utilize the gross through various aspects of the gross and is thus seeing, eating, drinking, sleeping, seeing, hearing, and feeling as an ordinary gross conscious human being, though he is all the while conscious only of the mental world with his mental sense of code seeing. Similarly, he can unconsciously utilize the subtle through the various gross aspects of energy in the form of nuclear energies, etc., while all the time being only conscious of code seeing with his mental sense. The mental conscious human soul in the mental world has now only one sense, and that is of seeing.
Thank you, Mahu. And Elizabeth?
Sorry. So this mental conscious human soul on the fifth plane experiences the first state of the mental world with the mental body or the mind, and gains consciousness of the first state of mind, the first state of mind. Here, this soul is capable of controlling the first state of mind, that is, thoughts of the gross conscious and subtle conscious human souls, but is now totally incapable of performing any miracles because of his soul, because of his total unconsciousness of the infinite energy of the subtle world and its powers. However, as this mental conscious human soul controls the first state of mind of the subtle conscious human souls, the incitement in the subtle conscious human soul to perform miracles is checked, controlled, or aggravated according to the desire and will of the mind of the mental conscious human soul, who is capable of creating and controlling thoughts of other minds and is himself stable and can never again slide down to any lower level of consciousness. Gradually, as the involution of the consciousness of the mental conscious human soul progresses deeper and deeper, he experiences mastery over the second state of mind, that is, feeling. And he now becomes fully conscious of the mind or mental body and experiences the whole of the mental body on the sixth plane. This experience is of, quote, seeing, end quote, God face to face, seeing God everywhere and in everything. And then there's footnote 8.
So continue with the text, please.
Okay, right from the first plane up through the sixth plane, the involution of consciousness progressed gradually and steadily as the consciousness of the soul had less and less frequent experiences of multifarious and diverse opposite impressions, which grew fainter and fainter. Therefore, while the involution of the soul's consciousness was in progress, the diverse opposite impressions became gradually scarcer and fainter until the involved consciousness of the soul on the sixth plane is fully conscious of the mental body and experiences the mental body in full with
Mental world. Mental world in full.
mental world in full with practically no impressions at all, except a faint last trace of residual impressions of opposites. That is, the involved consciousness fully identifies with mind, and the soul tends to realize that he is mind, and this soul, as mind, has a last and total impression that he, in quotes, sees God face to face in everything, but he cannot see himself as God. This mental conscious human soul of the sixth plane, almost void of all impressions, and there's another little asterisk, and only conscious of mind, now is confronted with God face to face and sees God in everything, but does not see himself in God because, being still conscious of mind, he takes himself as mind. This mental conscious human soul associates himself with mind and is conscious of himself as mind and experiences himself as still something other than God. This mental conscious human soul on the sixth plane actually, quote, sees God face to face more vividly and intensively than the gross or subtle conscious human soul sees objects of the gross or subtle worlds. At this stage, the consciousness of the soul, which had experienced diverse, innumerable, and opposite impressions, now experiences the last trace of dual impressions of the opposites. This mental conscious human soul on the sixth plane is still conscious of duality, identifying himself as mind and differentiating himself from God. Another footnote 9.
So you want to read the asterisks that referred to back to the word impressions?
Yeah, and then there was 8 and 9 as well in the text I read. Like an aching tooth that gradually works loose, but does not fall out for a long time, the false ego remains until the last stage of the first spiritual journey, although it becomes increasingly faint as the soul advances on the path, only to vanish forever and the final fana of the seventh plane, to be replaced by the unlimited real ego.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Marion, could you continue here with the seventh plane?
All right. Seventh plane. This experience of duality lingers on and on until the final involution of consciousness of the mental conscious human soul leads the soul to dissociate itself from the mind. The consciousness of the mind had objectified God, close paren, and makes the soul associate itself with its own self, the soul or Atma. Thus, the consciousness of the soul is now said to experience at last the consciousness of the seventh plane. Here on the seventh plane, the self-conscious human soul is conscious of himself as God and experiences infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss. For the mental conscious human soul to cross the sixth plane and experience the seventh plane by his own efforts is quite impossible. At this stage, the grace of a perfect master is absolutely essential to help the mental conscious human soul to dissociate himself from the consciousness of mind and to make him realize his unity with the infinite state, to experience infinite bliss consciously, and to realize that he, Atma, was eternally in bliss.
So let's just look at that asterisk.
However, those in the sixth plane of consciousness realize God at the time of dropping their bodies. Okay. So it is that the self-conscious human soul of the seventh plane is now fully conscious of the self as infinite and eternal, and is now also conscious of the source of energy and mind, which were nothing but the shadowy aspects of his own infinite power and infinite knowledge. This self-conscious human soul, which is now self-realized or God-realized, not only experiences infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, but simultaneously radiates them. Sometimes, in certain cases, such self-conscious human souls also make use of this infinite power, knowledge, and bliss directly and consciously for the emancipation of other souls from their impressions and their respective associations with the gross, subtle, and mental forms and worlds. In its travail to gain self-consciousness, the individual eternal Atma, soul, unconscious of its infinite state in Paramatma, gathered and experienced innumerable diverse impressions, and all the while associated itself with finite and ephemeral existences, unfurling the gross, subtle, and mental worlds, while evolving gross consciousness of the gross world, and while involving consciousness of the subtle and mental planes of the subtle and mental worlds.
Can we reread that last paragraph, please?
Oh, please don't interrupt and we'll just continue.
involution of consciousness of the Atma, soul, culminated by the grace of a perfect master, led the Atma to self-realization of its infinite state in Paramatma.
And the asterisk says,
shall I read the language foreign to me also? Savbar Tahira Daman Hatol Mir Aya Joab Ankh Noldika Abna Hi Garal Bajhai. And it's quote from Asgar. In English, 100 times I felt that I held your garment firmly in my hands. When I opened my eyes, I was amazed to discover it was my own garment that I was holding. Thus it is that when the consciousness of the Atma gained self-consciousness and experienced infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, the Atma realized that it exists eternally, that all through the travail to gain self-consciousness, the impressions, experiences, and associations of the gross, subtle, and mental bodies and worlds were nothing but a vacant dream, and that the identification with gross bodies, creatures, and human beings, and all the experiences of the three worlds and the six planes, with all of their paraphernalia, had their relative existences sustained and maintained as long as the consciousness of the Atma was immature. Maturity was only gained in the seventh plane, with consciousness fully involved. This led the Atma to realize the self, or made the Atma fully conscious of God realization. In other words, the Atma's own infinite state in Paramatma was consciously realized.
and the dagger says,
The God-realized man is the Almighty, plus knowledge and consciousness. He is in the perfect wakeful state. He is knowledge, knower and the known. He is love, lover and the beloved. He knows that he is in every Jiv Atma and that everyone is in him. The God-realized man knows that he is the be-all and the end-all of existence, and that he always was and will remain the same one infinite ocean of truth. But the ordinary man does not know whence he came and whither he will go.
thanks, Marianne.
Thank you.
Ernie, could you continue?
It is only after the final annihilation of the mind and the wearing out of the curtain of mental impressions that consciousness can function in full freedom from all impressional bindings. This means crossing the deep abyss which separates the sixth plane from the seventh plane. The seventh plane is the formless abode of the highest of the high.
And the double dagger says,
The reader is referred to Faradudan Attar's Mantik ut Tayyir, a Sufi allegory generally known as the Conference of the Birds, for a delightful description of the journey through the plains. Editor's note. The Most High, or the infinite God, as truth, can be realized only by transcending the entire realm of imagination. Only on this seventh plane does the soul fulfill the initial urge for self-knowledge by experiencing its own self as identical with the unchanging, eternal, indivisible, and formless Oversoul, with infinite knowledge, infinite reality, parens truth, close parens, infinite power, and infinite bliss.
And here we have chart 1, titled Planes and Worlds. God at the top, infinite power, knowledge and bliss. Consciousness of self goes with the seventh plane. Experiences consciously infinite power, knowledge and bliss. Sixth plane has no power. It's the mental world, mind, domain of mind. Fully conscious of second state of mind is the sixth plane, and master of minds of all, the creator and controller of feelings, desires, and emotions. Fifth plane is conscious of the first state of mind, that is thoughts, and controls only thoughts. Fourth plane is the threshold between the planes of power, energy, and the mental planes. It's fully conscious of energy, full power, and threatened by overpowering aspects of mind. Third plane gains greater consciousness of energy, and this is all of the subtle world, domain of energy. Second plane gains consciousness of energy, and first plane with gross nose, eyes, ears, experiences subtle smell, sights, music. And at the bottom, we have the gross world, which is probably where we should have started from. But anyway, includes universes visible and invisible. It imbibes energy from the subtle world through gross aspects of energy, such as nuclear, solar, etc., and imbibes the aspects of mind, of the mental world, such as desires, thoughts, and emotions. So continuing, Ernie, with part 6.
Part 6, Summary of States of Divine Consciousness. After taking human form and gaining full consciousness, that full consciousness which the Atma, parens soul, close parens, craved in order to experience Paramatma, the Atma still does not experience Paramatma, because even after attaining full consciousness, as long as this consciousness remains centered in gross impressions, the Atma perforce is made conscious of the gross body and must therefore experience the gross world. Without having
Sorry to interrupt, but I think, Ernie, if you can be closer to microphone a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just for people who would be listening to this video, I'm saying.
Okay, is that better?
Go ahead.
Without having human form, it is impossible for the Atma to gain consciousness of subtle and mental bodies and of self, capital self. Similarly, it is impossible to gather experience of the subtle world, the mental world, and of Paramatma. For the evolution of consciousness and for the evolution of form and for the experience of the gross world, it is absolutely necessary to have gross sanskaras, parens impressions. close parens. And as long as there are gross impressions, the Atma has no consciousness of the subtle and mental bodies. In human form, because of the evolution of full consciousness and because of the evolution of perfect form in the shape of a human being, and because of having taken full experience of the gross world, there is now no more need of gross impressions. Gross impressions can become subtle impressions. Subtle impressions can become mental impressions. And mental impressions can disappear. So in human form, the Atma can have consciousness of the subtle and mental bodies and of Atma itself, an experience of the subtle world, mental world, and of Paramatma. But the tragedy is that immediately after gaining full consciousness in human form, the Atma does not gain consciousness of subtle, parens, prime, close parens, and mental, parens, mana, close mana, close parens, bodies and self, capital self, and likewise does not experience the subtle and mental worlds and does not have experience of Paramatma. This is because gross sanskaras do not become subtle sanskaras or mental sanskaras, nor disappear immediately after the Atma has gained full consciousness in human form. The reason for this is that the first human form made out of the last animal form, when dropped, leaves behind a legacy of impressions of the first human form. And then each following incarnated human form is made up of the last human form sanskaras. So the Atma, in spite of having full consciousness, takes a number of human forms as long as gross sanskaras exist. Eventually, one of two things happens. The Atma's gross sanskaras may entirely disappear all of a sudden, and the Atma lose consciousness of the gross body and gain consciousness of the self, capital self, and thus losing the experience of the gross world and gaining experience of Paramatma. Or the second more likely possibility is that eventually the gross sanskaras will fade and become subtle sanskaras. Subtle sanskaras made more and more, may fade more and become mental sanskaras. And finally, mental sanskaras fade to such an extent that they disappear. In this case, the Atma first loses consciousness of the gross body and the experiences of the gross world, and gains consciousness of the subtle body and experience of the subtle world. Then the Atma loses consciousness of the subtle body and gains consciousness of the mental body, and loses experience of the subtle world and gains experience of the mental world. Finally, the Atma loses consciousness of the mental body, thereby gaining consciousness of the Atma itself, and loses the experience of the mental world and gains experience of Paramatma. After the Atma has gained self-consciousness and experiences the Paramatma, the Atma inherits one of the three states, not two or four states, but three states, definitely. First state, A. Soon after this experience of the highest of the high, the Atma generally drops all of its shadowy bodies, parens, gross, subtle, and mental, close parens, and eternally enjoys the individualized experience as a whole, the infinite power, knowledge, and bliss of God, without using the attributes thereof. First state B. The Atma may not drop these three bodies until sometime afterwards, although it is absolutely unconscious of these bodies, except that it retains the bodies. Its state is actually the same as A. Second state. The Atma retains the three bodies and simultaneously with self-consciousness, capital self-consciousness, is also conscious of its three shadows, parens, gross, subtle, and mental bodies, close parens, and at the same time experiences the infinite power, knowledge, and bliss of God. It also experiences the gross world, subtle world, and mental world as God's shadows, but it does not use the power, knowledge, and bliss of God for the other Atmas who are mental conscious, subtle conscious, and gross conscious, and so it is independent. Third state. This is exactly like the second state, except that the Atma uses its infinite power, knowledge, and bliss in making gross conscious Atmas subtle conscious, and subtle conscious Atmas mental conscious, and mental conscious Atmas capital self conscious. Even at one stroke, making gross conscious Atmas capital self conscious.
Thank you, Ernie. Mona?
Full development of subtle and mental bodies in human form and involution of consciousness. Only in the human form are subtle pran and mental mana bodies fully developed. Therefore, even when the Atma has gross consciousness and is unconscious of pran and mana, it does work through pran and mana, not directly, but on the gross plane. So, even if the gross conscious human Atma is conscious of pran and mana, and that,
Unconscious.
sorry,
Unconscious.
yes. Sorry, I'll just read that again. So, even if the gross conscious human Atma is unconscious of pran and mana, and therefore does not realize energy in mind, it can use energy through various aspects of energy. Example, nuclear. And it can use the mind through various aspects of mind, such as thoughts, desires, and emotions. In the human form, when the Atma has subtle consciousness, it is unconscious of the gross. Sharir. Sharir is the physical body, and mental mana bodies. Yet it does work through sharir and mana, not directly, but on the subtle plane. So even if the subtle conscious human Atma is unconscious of sharir and mana, and therefore does not realize the gross and mental worlds, it can use the gross through various aspects of the gross, as eating, drinking, sleeping, seeing, feeling, hearing, etc. And it can use mind through various aspects of the mind, as thoughts, desires, and emotions. In the human form, when the Atma has mental consciousness, it is unconscious of the gross, sharir, and subtle pran bodies. But it does work through sharir and pran, not directly, but on the mental plane. So even if the mental conscious human Atma is unconscious of the sharir and pran, and therefore does not realize the gross and subtle worlds. It can use the gross through various aspects of the gross, such as eating, sleeping, seeing, feeling, hearing, and it can use energy through various aspects of energy as nuclear, etc. To give a smile, let us consider,
Simile.
sorry,
Simile.
I'm blurred visually. To give a simile, let us consider, for instance, a gross conscious human Atma as a soul on earth, which we take as a standard for the gross plane, far flung from the sun, which, for instance, for the purpose of our simile only, we take as a source of energy of the subtle and the source of mind of the mental. The simile of the sun and earth must never be misconstrued as the sun and earth of the solar system. The sun, which we have now adopted as a standard, sheds its rays of energy and mind continuously and simultaneously on the earth, which we have taken as a standard for the gross. And the gross conscious human soul on earth, conscious only of the gross, unconsciously imbibes from the sun's rays the energy of the subtle, by making in the gross world the fullest use of the aspects of this energy in the form of nuclear energy. Also, this gross conscious human soul on earth unconsciously makes use in the gross world of the aspects of mind, such as thoughts, desires, and emotions, which it also imbibes from this sun's rays. For the purpose of continuing our simile, we shall now take the subtle conscious human soul as a soul in air, and hence much nearer this sun than the gross conscious human Atma on earth. This subtle conscious human soul in air is conscious only of the subtle consciously imbibes the fullest energy from this sun, which is the source of energy, and consciously makes use of this tremendous energy in its nascent form. Thus, the subtle conscious human soul is capable of well wielding tremendous power and is quite capable of giving sight to the blind or limbs to the maimed. This is the domain of the first three planes, and the capability of this soul to liberate energy and any intensity is achieved according to the degree of subtle consciousness gained by it in the second and third planes. While the subtle conscious human soul in its realm of energy consciously makes use of energy in its nascent state, it is unconscious of the mental. Therefore, unconsciously, it makes use of the aspects of mind, such as thoughts, desires, and emotions. Thus, it is capable of wielding tremendous power through its consciousness of energy. It is susceptible to getting entangled by by mind, while making use of the aspects of mind unconsciously. For this reason, this subtle conscious human soul, although mighty powerful, sometimes slides down to the lower level of subtle consciousness while making conscious use of its energy in the form of miraculous powers.
Thank you, Mona G. We'll continue from here next time. it's page 59, States of Divine Consciousness. And stop